I'm a hoarder, a collector of many different things. I collect classic LEGO sets from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, 1 to 400 scale die-cast model airliners, and Japanese Rail Wars memorabilia and merchandise. But by far, my largest and most prized collection is that of my HO scale train collection, which is the subject of today's video. I've been in model railroading for around 7 years now, and I've amassed quite a large collection since. I have a model railroad in my basement, but it's not that impressive, so we won't be focusing on that in today's video. Instead, I'll be discussing the specific locomotive pieces I have in my collection. Starting with steam locomotives. Every collection has to start somewhere, and this is where mine starts. This is Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis 150, a USRA 060 by Bachmann. The keen-eyed among you will know that this is the locomotive that headlines Bachmann's Chattanooga train set, which was my first train set back in 2015. Most of Bachmann's 060s are famous for headlining train sets, and they make good starter set locomotives. The locomotive isn't incredibly detailed or anything, but it's held up pretty well. In fact, it still runs really well, and I don't think I've had any issues with it over the 7 or so years I've owned it. It's a fantastic model, and these things are quite good runners. Here is Norfolk & Western 718, a Baldwin consolidation by Bachmann. This model is one of those former Spectrum toolings that Bachmann's rerun ever since, and this is a really solid model. The detail is really fantastic, and these things run really smooth. In fact, I've had this one for quite a long time too, and I've not really had too many issues with it. It's a good runner and a good looker. All the things you could want in an engine. This was also my first steam locomotive in the fleet to be equipped with DCC. Here is Baltimore, Ohio 4508, a USRA 282 Light Mikado by Bachmann. You'll be hearing that name a lot. Bachmann, I think, these days is one of the best manufacturers of trains out there, especially if you're on a budget. You can probably get their models for pretty cheap, and they're usually pretty good. 4508 I have mixed opinions on. It runs well, it sounds good, but a lot of the detail is minimal, to be frank, and a lot of it is plasticky. You'll probably notice on the fireman's side of the locomotive, a lot of the pipework and the dynamo has kind of been re-glued and glued back on multiple times. It's not the prettiest looking thing, but it gets the job done. Here's a locomotive I don't think should need any introduction. This is the fabulous, famous Pennsylvania Railroad K4S Pacific 1361 by Bachmann Spectrum. This is one of those older Bachmann Spectrum models that came in the big fancy schmancy boxes to make them look pretty, but in reality they have really poor quality mechanisms. I assume this has nylon gears in it, but I've never opened it, because it's never broken on me. This was the first steam locomotive I bought at a train show with my own money, so it holds a sentimental place in my heart, and I've not had any issues with it. It pulls well, it runs well, I can't fault anything about it. I wouldn't be surprised though if on the inside the nylon gears are beginning to die, because I have had it for quite a fair while. Like yin and yang, every fleet needs balance. I can't have the Pennsy Express engine without having a New York Central one. Here is New York Central 5405, a J3A Hudson by River Rossi. It's a stunning looker and is the first River Rossi engine in my collection. In fact, it's the only one. The thing runs well, it goes fast, it goes slow when it needs to go slow, and it can pull whatever it needs to pull, which is usually my rake of River Rossi coaches. I bought this at a train show about a year ago, probably second, third, or fourth hand even. And that train show is notable because it was the day after my high school's homecoming, and dare I say it was even better than the dance. Here is a real looker. This is Chesapeake in Ohio 2724, a Class K4 Kanoa by Proto 2000 from the Heritage Collection. This is probably my favorite American steam engine in the collection, and it's easy to see why. This thing is beautiful, and trumps both the Bachmann and the Lionel Berkshire locomotives in terms of detail, with separately fitted and molded on detail all looking fantastic. The thing also runs smooth as butter. I literally have no faults with this thing. If I had one criticism, it'd be that the driving wheels are for whatever reason shiny silver. which is a trade of the Lionel Berkshire shares. Also, hot take, I think the Chesapeake and Ohio Kanawhas are better than the nickel plate Berks. Sorry, nickel plate fans, crucify me. Here is another engine that should need no introduction. This glossy fellow is Norfolk & Western 611, a 484 J-Class by Bachmann. The J-Class is another one of those toolings Bachmann has run for centuries now, seems like. This particular tooling, I think, came around sometime in the late 80s or early 90s. And this most recent model includes DCC sound value. This was the first sound-equipped locomotive in my collection, fun fact. The J-Class has been my favorite class of locomotive ever since I was young, and it's a good one to have as a favorite. I know that's a basic take, but just look at the damn thing, it's beautiful. The Tuscan stripe and the streamlined shroud, very fantastic, and I think Bachmann captured this really, really well. Here is New York Central 6005 and S1B Niagara by Bachmann. I've given Bachmann a lot of praise in this video, but this one is one I will not be giving them praise for. This is one of their older Bachmann Plus Niagaras, and this thing is a potato in all sense of the word. This thing runs like crap. It can't pull to save its life, and on anything that isn't straight level track, it will struggle on, even when running light. This is one of those old ones with the plastic nylon gears that tend to degrade and go bad over time. This thing is not worth the money. If you see one of these things, avoid it at all costs. Bachmann's run the Niagara a couple other times, so there's some better ones out there, but this one is one I'd stay away from. Here is the biggest locomotive in the collection, the Giant, if you will. This is Norfolk & Western 2011, a 2882Y3 from the Proto 2000 Heritage Collection. After buying my Kanawha, I kinda caught the bug, and knowing that they made a 2882 Norfolk & Western Articulated, I kinda needed it. I've been a fan of Norfolk & Western Articulateds almost ever since I got out of the womb. They just all look awesome. However, I'm not willing to shell out $400 for Broadway Limited's newest tat, so I'm kind of been apprehensive about buying them. This one is a pretty solid runner. It's not as good a puller nor as good of a runner as the Kanawha is, but it does its job and looks good. And somehow it's able to tackle the awful track work on my layout. I have a love for international steam as well, particularly British, continental European, and Japanese. But a lot of those models are hard to find, except British, so I have a small collection of British locomotives from across the pond. This is one of them. This is Great Western 109, an 040 pocket rocket tank engine by Hornby. This is essentially Hornby's equivalent of those Bachmann 060s, the sort of thing you see in cheap starter sets. And for what it is, it looks fine and it runs well. I got this in a train pack with 3 freight cars for $30 on Amazon, and really I only bought it for the freight cars, and I'm pretty sure I've run the freight cars more than I've run this. Here's something completely different. Here is Edward from Bachmann's Thomas & Friends range. I don't like Bachmann's Thomas & Friends range. I think the models are extremely overpriced for what are essentially very poor mechanisms on very poorly detailed shells. These models lack even simple details like separately fitted handrails, which are factory standard on most any model train you can buy these days. Edward's mechanism in particular is kind of bad because he only picks up from his 2 driving wheels, which are already really close together, so he has issues on bad track. Otherwise, I think this is a fantastic model, and let's be real, it's Edward. It's a good looking model. Edward is my favorite Thomas character, and I kind of had to have him. If I were forced to sell all my trains, this would be the single one I would keep. This is my baby, my child. This is Caledonian Railway 828, a Macintosh 812 class by Bachmann, produced exclusively for Rails of Sheffield. And this thing is gorgeous. I love the Caledonian Railway a lot, particularly their livery. With the beautiful maroon undercarriage and the blue drivers, the blue lining and the white lining on the boiler, it just looks so nice. And this model does not disappoint. This thing looks fantastic, it runs smooth like butter, and it's got all kinds of fun features like sprung buffers, a firebox glow in the cabin, and removable coal. None of my American engines have removable coal. That's ridiculous. And it has better backhead detailing than any of my American steam engines. Overall, a fantastic engine. Rounding out the steam collection is this. This is British Railway 45021, a Stanier Black 5 by Hornby. This is one of those older Hornby engines with a tender drive, and it runs pretty well. This one is peculiar, however, because the previous owner of this added headlights to the front of it and gave it Markland couplers. I had to steal Edwards' front coupler to use on the back of this so it could pull anything. A weird mod, to be sure, but nothing I couldn't fix. And I do think the headlights actually look kind of good in a weird way. This thing runs pretty well, and it pulls what it needs to pull. The Black 5 is a stunning and pretty elegant looking British locomotive, and you can't really go wrong with a good old Hornby tender drive. This is not a diesel. This is an electric, but I didn't know where else to put it. This is Pennsylvania Railroad 4935, a GG1 electric by Bachmann. Bachmann's GG1, I think, is a pretty underrated model. It's a pretty good model. It runs well, it sounds decent, and it looks decent as well. And you can get them for usually pretty cheap. This model came out like 7 years ago, but you can still find models floating around on the markets like trainworld.com for reasonable prices these days. It's not the most fantastic model. The pantographs have 2 modes, up or down. You can't sort of put them intermediate. So if your tunnels don't have enough clearance to fit that big thing, then this thing is going to have to run third rail power. Oh well. Here's 4472. Not the Flying Scotsman, but an old lifelike F7 in Baltimore, Ohio chassis system colors. This one has quite the story behind it. This was one of a handful of trains my dad had acquired for me. This is part of a collection he bought many years ago when I was probably 5 or 6. He knew I liked trains and had bought some for the future. But he forgot about it eventually, and those trains sat in a box in the basement until we found them like 2 years ago. And this is the only one of the engines that I've gotten working. The other 2 were an old lifelike 040 Santa Fe steam switcher and a Tyco Mantua G.I. Joe Plymouth switcher. This one runs okay. I don't know what else is more to say about it besides it's a chassis F7. Here is Pennsylvania Railroad 9654 and Pennsylvania Railroad 9654. This is a pair of EMD F7A units by Bachmann. These I bought at a train show many years ago, and I bought them from the local county historical society. $25 for the pair. Not a bad deal. These days, these guys could use a little bit of touch-up. The rear locomotive here with the paper in the windows and the broken horn barely runs, and the lead unit is spotty. But for $25, what more could you get? And it helps the historical society. Don't go in the water. There's a shark in there. Yup, this is New York Central 3839 and 3738, a pair of AB RF16 Baldwin shark noses by Bachmann. These were another train show find about a year ago. I paid $60 for the pair, both equipped with DCC. Not a bad deal. Both of these guys run pretty well and can pull a sizable train. Now what makes these interesting is particularly the lead unit. The road number 3839 was not the factory installed number, but it was added to the engine by the previous owner. But there was no New York Central shark nose numbered 3839 as far as I'm aware. So I'd like to know the story behind that. If you're the former owner of this, please let me know. Here is something a little more exotic. This is Florida East Coast 1012 and EMD E7 by Proto 2000. Most of my fleet reflects my native Southwest Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York Central, Baltimore, and Ohio, and the like. But this is completely different. I have a soft spot for South Florida railroading as I have a lot of family down there. I am particularly a big fan of the Florida East Coast, Tri-Rail, and Brightline. The FEC has plenty of models floating around, this one included. It runs well and looks good. One day I'd like to get a Florida East Coast ES44 with one of the little fuel cars in the middle of it. That'd be kind of cool. I'd also like to get a tri-rail set that isn't $1 bajillion. And someone please make a bright line in HO scale. Please, anybody, please, I'm begging. I'll even pay for a brass one. Here's another E7. This is Baltimore, Ohio 74, an E7A by Bachmann. This thing is a fantastic runner. It sounds great, and it goes fast. What more could you want out of an express passenger engine? This one's a favorite of mine, particularly because I have a matching set of Baltimore and Ohio passenger coaches I run this thing around with. The coaches are illuminated, and the whole thing looks fantastic at speed, especially with the lights turned out. You can't go wrong with this thing. The E7 is one of those Bachmann models that kind of flew under most people's radars, and I think that's a shame because this is a really good looker. Baltimore and Ohio strikes again in the form of an Alco RS1 switcher. This is number 9185 and it's made by Kato. This is my only Kato model and it is literally a tank. I bought this like 5 years ago at my local hobby shop for like $40. I've never had a single issue with it. It can handle anything. Any load I throw at this, any piece of track I throw at this, it can handle easy peasy lemon squeezy. There's some brand new models I have that can't even handle stuff. This thing can handle them probably. I don't know what bit of Japanese engineering went into these things, but by golly god, these things are fantastic runners. One more Baltimore and Ohio locomotive for the good measure. There's B&O 6599, an EMD GP18 by Proto 2000. This is quite similar to the last B&O engine in many ways. It is a tank. They can handle any train I throw at it, and it will probably handle it quietly and smoothly, and even take it on the roughest track. It's a good engine, by all stretches of the word. This was also a relatively cheap one. I paid $35 for this. Some of the details a little iffy, there's some parts missing or bent or broken, but that's fine. It works, and by golly goodness, I've gotten more use out of it than the Niagara I bought at the same train show. Here is one of my personal favorites. It is Erie Lackawanna 2553, a GP35 by Bachmann. But this isn't too remarkable in many ways. The detail is pretty plain. It runs decent. The livery is applied well, and it looks pretty good. But I love it a lot. This was one of my first DCC equipped locomotives. I got it for Christmas one year, and it's got a pretty solid livery. You can't beat the EL gray and maroon. You just can't. This one also has the notability of being the only train in the collection to have appeared in a school yearbook. My sophomore year school yearbook, it made a cameo. So it's a little famous. Here's another Jeep. This is Chesapeake, Ohio 4089, a GP 40-2 diesel by Atlas. This is a pretty solid model. Don't have much to say about it other than it's a Jeep in chessy colors and it runs pretty well and can pull about whatever I throw at it. What makes this one special is where I got it. This was bought at the I Love Toy Train store in Michigan City, Indiana. And if you're like me, you probably got started in the model railroading and train hobbies through the TM Books and Videos I Love Toy Train series. If it wasn't for those guys, I probably wouldn't be here in my basement talking about trains. So this is my little way of saying thanks, I suppose. This is a locomotive I have no sentimental value for. This is Norfolk & Western 6518, an EMD GP50 by Bachmann. This was the second engine in my collection. I got it for my birthday a few months after Christmas 2015 when I got my first train set. And this thing is a lemon by all stretch of the word. This thing runs like poop. It ran well for 2 years or so, and then it just decided to stop working on anything that wasn't straight level track. And even that was too much for it at one point, and now it runs on nothing. It'll just intermittently cut out, even when it's not pulling anything or when the track is perfectly fine. This thing's been a pain in my side for 5 years now, and I don't have the heart to care about it anymore. Let's break up the EMD monotony with a General Electric engine. This is Penn Central 6540, a U33C by Atlas. This thing is a pretty solid runner. It can pull about anything I throw at it, and it handles trains pretty well, and it runs quite quietly. The only issue is that broken handrail, which I can fix, but I'm too lazy to. I bought this at a train show about a year or two ago. That was one of the worst train shows I've ever been to. I drove an hour to Columbus to go to it, and it was full of very bad vendors. There were like 2 guys selling HO scale stuff, the rest were boomers selling post-war Lionel stuff, or vendors of China's finest marketable garbage. Not one I'd recommend. Here is CSX 8840, an EMD SD40-2 by Bachmann. I also got this at the same birthday I got my 6518, and I like this one a lot more. It's a little more sentimental to me, as CSX was the hometown railroad of where I was living at the time, and also, this one actually works. I've never had a singular issues with this. It runs well. It's taken a little bit of a beating for being thrown around a bit. There's some paint chips on the handrails and the horns are all busted, but it's a solid runner. It can pull stuff, it can haul, and it's pretty quiet. This is one I don't think I'll be parting with anytime soon. Here's another SD40. This is Norfolk Southern 3329 in the beautiful Maersk Sealand livery by Atheron. This is a DCC sound-equipped model and is the only DCC sound-equipped model in my fleet not made by Bachmann. And the livery on this is fantastic, as is the detail. I love the Maersk colors, and that might just be my bias for the old Lego set, but it just looks so nice. Detail and paint are both astonishing, and the sound quality on this is fantastic. This thing echoes like nobody's business. It's a fantastic model and definitely a standout in the collection. One I'd highly recommend for any Maersk Sealand or Norfolk Southern fans out there. Here is Conrail 8098, an AC 4400CW by Atheron. Now, I hear what you're saying.
That's silly, Penn Central. The Conrail Heritage Unit was an ES44 AC, not an AC 4400 CW, which were never rationed by Conrail nor Norfolk Southern.
And you're right, this is a fantasy livery. I don't know why Atheron chose this livery specifically, or this locomotive, but it exists, nonetheless. I like it, it runs well and it looks good, and that's really all you need in a model train. This is also peculiar because it came in a Southern box. It's an AC 4400 CW marked as a Southern Heritage Unit, so somewhere out there is an AC 4400 in Southern Crescent colors. Go find it. And here is the final engine of the day. This is Norfolk Southern 1073 in the Penn Central Heritage colors. It's an SD70 ACE by Bachmann. Bachmann's SD70s are not bad models. They're much cheaper than something as, say, the scale trains or Intermountain models are, but they're not the highest of quality. The sound is fine and most of the details molded on. The liveries look good, I guess, and can't say much more. For my channel name being Penn Central, I really only have 2 Penn Central engines, and this one barely counts. It's a Norfolk Southern engine masquerading in Penn Central colors. Nevertheless, it is a good-looking model and one I quite like. And so, that's the collection. Thank you all for watching and sticking it around to the end. I know this is a little bit of a different video to anything I've made, as I've not really talked about my model trains on my YouTube channel that often before. If you would like to see more content like this, head over to my Instagram page, as that's where I post most stuff about my model train collection. If you'd like to see me talk about some other collections I have, like the Legos or the Rail Wars stuff or the model airplanes, do let me know, because I can make videos on those and I can ramble on about stuff for hours on end. Thank you for watching, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and see you in the next one. Cheerio!